Thanks, Paul. Let's get our panelists' videos on. I can see Adrian already there. So Chad and Neil, if you can turn your videos on. Great. Now, depending on, as participants in this conference, depending on how you've got your speaker view set up, you should be able to see us all. And you will notice that I have assembled a lovely manel of white middle-aged men with beards to make sure that we're hitting all the diversity notes. But look, just before we jump in and I allow them to unmute themselves and get into some vigorous discussion, I'm going to share my screen because as an activity I think that we should do, particularly after Steve's really inspiring and excellent presentation this morning. Screen 2. Do you want to jump over, because yesterday I learned about this awesome program Mentimeter, jump over on your computers to menti.com, chuck in the code 5753414, and without paying any particular attention to trying too hard, just put in the first words that come to mind when you think of disabled people. And we will see them populating on the screen as you go. So, yep, wheelchair accessibility. Chad, was that just you? Here we go, visibility.
You wouldn't believe it.
No, so not just our panelists, right? Everyone jump on board. Here we go. Normal, understated superheroes. Thank you. I know that one was just for me. Voice being captured, understated, left behind. I like this about guidelines and DDA compliance. And we were talking in the last really interesting session about there's more and more really early consultation in Lake Macquarie and Newcastle City Councils with the whole community, which is it's really excellent. There's so much great stuff happening in our city. Sometimes it's more difficult and there's more processes involved with properly inclusive consultation, absolutely. And I think something that we've learned during COVID is lots of different ways to do that virtually. What else we got? Ignored by engineers, obstructed, hang on, curb ramps, sound, sensory. So there's quite a lot of diversity in this representation of disability that you've come up with just here. I love people are saying all abilities, forgotten. Okay. Now I'm hoping, because I've never used Menti before, I'm hoping that just stays there because I'd love to bring us back to that now. So just very briefly on this manel, this bearded manel today, I'm chairing. We've got Chad, who you can see. He is sitting on the lands of the Warramai and Wabakal people, as am I, and Neil and Vicki Penn. And then, sorry, I've just got something in front of Adrian's lovely bearded face. Adrian is sitting on Gadigal country, and we just acknowledge that these are stolen lands and that we are very privileged to be working and broadcasting and discussing on them today. So you've brought up lots of different ideas around what disability is to you and what it looks like, what we should think about. I think, honestly, it's just less interesting than that. We're just really busy. Like, we might be superheroes, we might be all of these things, left out, left behind. There's lots of different ways that we need to use mobility aids to get around the city, but we're also just really extraordinarily busy because planning to use infrastructure like it is and to get around in our cities is extraordinarily time consuming. So just a little bit of an introduction for me, and then I'll go through and kind of tell you a bit more about these panelists. So this used to be me, make no apologies, but that's not me anymore. You know, I've had all the normal competitive cyclist stuff going in my life. So I'm disabled. Most of my disabilities are quite invisible, and I live with chronic illness. So I'm immune compromised in the middle of a pandemic, which is super fun. But how awesome that, you know, I can be in this conference from home. This is also me. I cycle around the city. I don't have a car. And Stephen Fleming this morning was talking about how, and I love this, so don't live on the top of a big hill that's in an environment where there's just, you're surrounded by SUVs, just move to somewhere else. So I did, and I was in the privileged position to be able to make a conscious choice to move into the city of Newcastle, get an electric assist cargo bike, and that has changed the way that I can be healthier because I'm riding more. You know, it's had all those health benefits that we were talking about are sometimes just a byproduct of changing things around and having good infrastructure. This is me in a walk-up apartment block in Paris. I just chucked this in before with reference to Stephen's presentation about we need more density in cities. It's a complete nightmare, obviously, to people who have disabilities and who aren't able to get upstairs. The lift was teeny tiny. And yeah, I made, you know, an effort to really enjoy myself while I was there, but I wouldn't have been able to bring my cargo bike into that building. And we are productive members of society. So there's a constant, and especially at the moment in this pandemic, there's just recurrent debate around whether or not our lives are actually worth anything. And it's hard to take, but it's easier to take when it just comes out at you and it's said very clearly that this design is not for you, rather than when these kind of rhetoric is just continued with these little microaggressions, like, for example, developing amazing disability access and inclusion plans that are really well considered and thought through. When those aren't actioned or things aren't put into practice, then that again is just saying, hey, we don't really care about how able you are to participate in the city, how well you can get your kids around and how well you're able to, you know, work. So that's a problem. Anyway, what I think is that we need to be more visible. So you should be able to see people getting around the city with wheelchairs, using walking frame. It shouldn't be something that you just every now and then see a disabled person and think, what a superhero, Chad's made it to the pub. Like, that's amazing. Like, I wish I could be more inspirational like you. I mean, I do, but that's for other reasons with Chad. And yeah, we're cranky about being left out, but we're going to have a discussion today about, whilst we're aiming for these aspirational targets of actually having accessible cities, accessible buildings, there are good plans in place. There's lots of consultation. In the meantime, what are some kind of low touch, low hanging fruit things that we can impact on to make sure that we're included as much as possible while we're aiming to get there? Neil, I'd love to start with you just as the introduction. So Neil, I know through being involved in stroke research. So Neil's had a stroke. He was a commuter cyclist for the 27 years of work going to BHP prior to having his stroke. So he's seen kind of the accessibility of roadways for years and years and years as a non-car user. So this is Neil on the Fernley track. Does about 60 Ks a week on his bike. Here he is out and about. I love this photo because everyone that's not in Newcastle, I know it's a national conference, but we live in a pretty lovely place. Neil uses a variety of different walking routes to get around the city, and his lovely wife, Vicki. Now, if you've got your microphone on, I can't remember who this little one is.
It's our grandson. He's about 3 months old now.
Chad, we've got Chad here as well. So Chad's been helping out with the conference on like manning the chats with me. I'm going to show just a little video of Chad to introduce him a bit better. I'm just going to unshare and share again to make sure I've got the sound linked in. Yes.
Hi, I'm Chad Ramage from Accessibility in the City, and we're building a cloud-based accessibility mapping platform. A bit of background on myself. I have an undiagnosed neurological condition similar to spinal muscular atrophy type 3, but definitely not that. So that has meant that I've been able to walk medium to short distances until I was about 30 years old when I first started using a wheelchair full time. So for the last 8 years, I've been wheeling up a storm around Newcastle, Australia, and the world. This photo is with Declan Clausen, the Deputy Mayor of Newcastle, presenting me a giant cheque from winning a mobility challenge using smart city data. I think it will be the first and last time I receive a massive novelty cheque. Some of the issues when I first started using a wheelchair included finding the information on where I could actually go and how to get there. Finding this information is really difficult as there are lots of different sources and inconsistent information. It seems like the big problem is just getting that big blue park at the door, but where are they? How do you find them if you're going to go to a new location? There are accessible toilets where we're going, stairs, or steep inclines to try and traverse when we get there. Is there an accessible bus or train? The problem is, how do people with accessibility issues safely and comfortably move around our cities? So let's try and assist with one of the UN's Sustainable Development Goals and reduce inequalities by giving people information they need to move around day to day. The platform provides a simple, workable solution that allows individuals with accessibility issues to safely initiate, plan, access, and navigate urban environments so that they're able to more fully participate in the life of those communities. It's delivered via a web-based platform that is accessible on any smartphone, mobile, or other connected device or computer. The platform is accessible for all at all times with live validated data. As of the last census in Australia, 20% of us had a declared disability. If we step back from accessibility and look at other statistics, we also have 14% over the age of 65 who struggle to move through our cities, and parents with prams or children under the age of 4 are 6%. So up to 40% of our population may have some form of limited mobility and could use this information to better plan their escapades around our cities. We've had some fantastic traction locally, working with the City of Newcastle to present their data. TAFE New South Wales and 1804 are my local incubator hub here in Newcastle that hosted the Smart Mobility Challenge that we won in 2019. Singleton Council have also been able to work with us in presenting their data. Accessible environments benefit everyone, not just people with disabilities. Our platform helps reduce isolation and discrimination and help all aspects of life, including health, welfare, education, and employment. These impacts are felt beyond the individual, with families and the broader community all being positively impacted by an inclusive society. So my name again is Chad Ramage, and thank you for your time today.
So that's Chad. Accessibility in the city is a really cool way of getting information to people. I like to call it Chad's Maps, so I need to remind myself that's not what it's called. So yeah, if I can get my presentation working again, the key thing here is that we are 20% of the population, and we do normal stuff. Like this is Adrian, who I'm just about to introduce at a gig, just doing normal things. And the thing is, we can't just all live in the bottom floor of these high-rise urban dwellings that we're thinking forward about, because we live with other people who aren't disabled. We don't just all live together, pushed off to the side. And I know I'm preaching to the converted here, and you're all in this session because you're involved in planning or consulting or whatever else that it is. And we're here, I guess, as a united front of people with lived experience. So we want you to ask us questions about, you know, how we could work more closely with you just to make things better. But also, in the meantime, how do we get the information out there to other people who need to use the infrastructure, so that you know when a venue is accessible or not? So Adrian, I know you through working together on different stroke research projects, and you've got a number of different roles. I'm going to be quiet and let you introduce yourself.
Thanks, Jill, and hello everyone. Thanks for having me. A number of different roles. Yeah, look, one of the roles is pedestrian. I'm a pedestrian. I do a lot of walking because I can't drive because I'm vision impaired. I do a lot of walking, bushwalking there in Tasmania, by the way. Seeing yourself on screen is weird. Look, I work for a disability organisation. I was on the Consumer Council of the Stroke Foundation, but I currently work for the Physical Disability Council in New South Wales. And so we're the peak body that represents people with physical disabilities in New South Wales. And accessibility is close to their heart and close to my heart, because quite literally, the second I walk out my front gate, I'm into a world of randomness and stress. It's a bit stressful. I've done a lot of modifications to my own home so that it is disability friendly. but quite literally, I walk out the front gate and I do trip on a slight crack in the footpath, and then I'm horizontal and bleeding. So that's what the outside world is for me, but that doesn't scare me, and that's not going to stop me doing it. I just want to be out there and enjoying it like everybody else, and I think that's the same, as Jill said, for everybody. You know, we just want to get on with our lives. I'm not a superhero. I'm just a dad who likes to get out in bush and explore risk, I guess.
Absolutely. Kind of on the same frame, I want to bring Neil into the conversation. Can you just tell us a little bit more about the different mobility aids that you use to get around the city? And then in particular, you've told me about this one trip, which just highlighted so many different things to me that was just way more hard than it needed to be.
Yes, I mainly use a walking stick, but I do use manual and electric wheelchairs on occasion to get around, but mainly the walking stick, single point.
Yeah. And then you were telling me about how recently you had a day out and you had to go to 2 different places. So you'd made a plan and then it just all went wrong.
Yeah, I was at the university doing videos for the physiotherapy department, and I tied it in with my physiotherapy, hydrotherapy visit to Jesmond on a Monday. I searched Google Maps and everything to work out the best route to get from the uni to Jesmond, which was going to take me about an hour, and I was going to make my appointment. And then I get halfway through the university and there's a closed footpath because they were doing some work. And that meant I then had to walk half a kilometre out of my way, and I ended up being late.
Yeah, and you had no way of knowing about that in advance.
No.
So
All the searching I'd done on Google Maps and Street View showed it to be open.
Yeah. Someone here, Anthony's just commenting to say accessibility is recognised in legislation, but not in detailed development controls and engineering standards. And I think that's absolutely important. But also I wonder how we can better, actually implement these different standards in a practical way in a local context. I think we're sort of talking to that. How do you, if you've got standards around how much access you need to keep when you're doing work on a path, there's some kind of walk around for people who can walk, but if it's not going to be accessible to a certain percentage of the population during roadworks, how can we let people know so you don't just end up stuck, not able to get to your appointment or not able to get to work?
Yeah, yes, I'm not quite sure. Probably some sort of app, I guess.
Any developer? Chad, do you want to, this is not just an ad for Chad's Maps. It should be, but it's not. But information, like if you could get more information earlier, what's the real impact on your day compared to just not having the information?
I was going to mention, I was having a chat to a friend with low vision, and he told me once when he was out just waiting in a bus stop, not realising that there was a bit of paper advising that the bus wasn't running there for a week. So being that he was a complete cane user, like no visibility to just look at where the timetable was, like it's a really hard situation as to how can we communicate those changes out. So I know I've discussed previously if there's Facebook groups or things like that, if they have your say, that local community and members can like and get fed information through there. But again, that isn't going to reach everyone. So it is a really hard one to hit. But if there is at least a number of communication methods that local government areas or councils are trying to promote, that can then be pushed out through whether it's the not-for-profits or service providers, and the people working with community in those areas. But there was a really interesting question or statement in there around the engineers or the legislation being there. And I know I've spoken to a council before about, as a part of their inclusion access plan, mentioned that they had accessibility audits done on like every public facing facility that they've got. So I asked to have a look at one, and it was definitely a 60-page audit document. But when you start to actually have a look at, is there an accessible toilet there, that was just page 12 that was empty because there wasn't one. It was ambulant toilet, empty page, wasn't one there. It's like, is there accessible parking at this, say, hall? Empty page, nothing there. So, and not every venue will be accessible, which is fine, but people need to at least have that knowledge to be able to plan. Are we going to have a birthday party here, or are we going to have extended periods of time here, or do we just need to go somewhere else?
And it should be easy for everyone involved in your social group to find that information and plan. And I think to make things more complex, but also simpler, everyone's needs aren't the same. And so it is impossible to design for everyone's needs all of the time. But I think that generally in the way that you look at disabled people in the media, there's not very many ways to be disabled. So probably the kind of societal understanding of a disabled person is a wheelchair user. And there's lots of different things that can impact on people as they move through cities. Yes, this is a segue to you, Aid. You've been involved in some really useful consultation about Sydney trains. So I'd love you to comment on that a little bit, but also maybe just talk to the different disabilities that impact on the way that you get around in the city.
I realised I was waving this, but I didn't have it in front of the camera. I get around. I feel like a fraud because I see perfectly well and I'm totally blind. So I see on my left, totally blind on my right. So train stations, busy environments are super stressful for me. And so I took the mental gymnastics, the jump to, I need to use a cane in the city, basically. I live in Sydney. When I'm in busy places, because you're all random and I just want to get from A to B without falling over you or having unpleasant conversations with strangers about why I walked into you. So I have to use a cane. And there's no other way, I can get around it. I had a situation where I walked into a guy with dark glasses and a white cane, and we bumped straight into each other. It was kind of Monty Python, and if you didn't laugh, you'd cry because he was swearing at me, saying, "Oh, didn't you see me, mate?" And I said, "Oh, I'm vision impaired too." So I feel like a phony at times because I don't look like you, Jill, with hidden disability. I don't look disabled, but I am, and so. There's the what's going on in your head before you even get out into the world. And as you said, I was involved. Transport for New South Wales have an accessible transport action committee, which I used to sit on. And they were very good with the new intercity fleet in involving people in consultation rather than building it and going, okay, now how do we make it accessible? How do we make it compliant? They were heavily involved with various areas of the disability sector and various disability types to understand what users' experiences are and how users are going to interact with this thing that's going to be in service for 30 plus years. So let's get it right from the start rather than building it and then going, oh, we didn't think about that. So that was well done them. That was a pleasure to be involved with people that wanted to work with you to make public transport work for you, I guess.
Yeah, absolutely. And so I'm just wanting to pose a question back to, can't see everyone at a glance that's still here, but I'm wondering if any of the local consultation that's happening, do you keep numbers or are there quotas on how many people with disability you'll include in the consultation? Because this is where I've been involved in different consultations and as a consumer rep on things, and to try and get everyone's voices so that you can have really sensible solutions. Like you've got to have local people who live in the areas to kind of say, well, yes, that standard is going to work there. How do you know that you've consulted with disabled people? Is there anyone that can comment? And then we'll address a couple of questions that have come up here. And I guess it's probably not surprising if you don't know how many disabled people have fed back or been involved, because, you know, as an example, many organisations don't actually have information or numbers on how many disabled people work in their organisations. Hunter New England Health, our large health district with 16,000 employers, doesn't know how many disabled people work within the organisation. So then it's very difficult to know whether or not you're meeting people's needs, because you can't purposefully sample, you know, you can't purposefully survey them. So anyway, if there's not going to be a comment from anyone, that's just something to think about, and something that maybe even we could collaborate on.
Oh, good. I got a very quick comment on that.
Oh, James, yeah.
Consultation.
So that everyone's aware, can you just reintroduce your perspective, where you talk, which position you're talking from?
Yes, I'm an engineer consultant in Melbourne for GTA Consultant. So I'm a designer by trade. But I do quite a bit on consultation as well. And one thing I see a lot of it back in the UK and here is that consultation will be an online survey. It'll be like Commonplace or CrowdSpot or something like that. It might be put on the council website, whereas the better approach in my mind is going to your local religious groups and your aged care homes, and actually finding them inner champions within different parts of the community. One place I've always kind of felt quite strongly about, I'm kind of against shared paths in a residential area. And the one voice you never find is the person who may be, you know, the elderly person who doesn't leave their home because they see, you know, cycling on the footpath as a barrier to walking. You can ask as many questions as you want in the street, but if you're not capturing people, these other voices, then, you know, you're not really doing a good job of your consultation. And I just think it's going to the schools, it's going to the churches, it's going to you know, residents groups, trade associations, all that kind of thing. Just don't be lazy and just do an online consultation. Like, really get in there, and you'll start to discover who you need to speak to.
Yeah, thank you, James. I think that's so important, and much more difficult at the moment because of COVID, but absolutely not impossible. I didn't mention, but my professional background is that I'm a physiotherapist. I teach in gerontology and rehabilitation, and do research in medical rehabilitation. So absolutely, some of my work is around making research more accessible to people, so that we can get the voices of people with all sorts of different access needs included. So there's work to be done on making sure that the consultation is hitting all the right marks. And it's not about, I'm going to be careful not to do a big segue here, but it's not about just making sure everyone's included because it feels nice, and this kind of social model of disability, which is important, whereby we include people by providing welfare. So a good example of that is, well, so long as we can provide a disabled person with a support worker that can go and open the doors for people and can like ring the pub in advance for them and say, can you please get your ramp out of the back storage room if you can find it, because my, you know, person I'm supporting would like to get into the pub. That's one way of supporting people to participate. But actually, if we think about this as a human rights issue of everyone should be able to get around autonomously in their own society, that has massive economic benefits, because we just want to go and spend money. Like the 85-year-old person who's just had a hip replacement worked with me, and, you know, so much of my professional work, working with people on their walking speed and reactions, is just about not getting killed by cars. Like, we spend so much time in therapy making it someone's personal responsibility to achieve these amazing feats of power and agility so that they can cross a road. What if we reinvested some of that in making the roads safer and slowing the traffic down, and meaning that people can just go out independently, not get killed? Not a totally different argument to making streets safer for children, but I just don't think we can achieve that if we only have the standards and implement the standards without making sure there's consultation so they can be translated to how is that going to work at that new roundabout in Queensland. Somebody had popped a question in. So it might fit a standard, but if actually for this big section of the people who actually live there, if it's not going to be a safe crossing, then it's a bit useless.
Depth perception is very unforgiving if you get that wrong. There
was someone with a very specific question about roundabouts in Queensland. do you want to unmute yourself because it's hidden up there and ask the question directly? And I'm scrolling just to find it. No, the Queensland person with the roundabouts and the crossings. Oh, not on camera. The roundabouts in Brisbane. I'm hoping that we kind of have covered off in a general sense, though, the crux of that question. And it was about a roundabout design and a particular type of crossing that just wasn't going to be practically workable. So dump it into the chat again if you've missed it and you think it's really important to discuss. A question I have is that, like, Neil, what changes for you if you have information about all the different places that you might want to go? Say you want to go out for lunch, you've got information about how accessible every part is, compared to if you don't, and a friend says, meet me at this pub, like how much practical time and planning is it? And Vicki, by all means, weigh in. Like how much time does this actually take that you could be spending living life or just doing other stuff?
Oh, Neil would probably spend half the night before sitting in his chair at the computer, you know, looking as to where we're going and is there a park close by? Are there any steps getting into it? Will he be able to take the electric chair? Would it be better in the manual chair, or will he just have to walk? It's more comfortable, obviously, for him to sit on his wheelchair cushion. But yeah, he would spend probably a couple of hours just researching where we're going the night before, wouldn't you?
Yeah. Is there footpaths? Are they sloped? Forwards, backwards, sideways is my biggest footpath. 8, left to right slopes.
You always have to pick which side of the road to walk on.
Yeah. Yeah, I hate that.
Yes.
And then when I get to the pub, am I going to get hassled by the bouncers for being pissed when I'm just walking with a limp because I've had a stroke? But that's a whole separate issue, which people with disabilities contend with.
That was great when I was at a pub in Sydney, and because when I was still walking at that time, and because hilariously we said, is there an accessible entry, or is this pub accessible? They said, yeah, we've got like 4 lifts. So we went to the only entrance that was open at the time, and it was either down a set of stairs to the lift or up the set of stairs to where there were 4 perfect lifts in a row. But then coming back down, I was leaning over the railing because that was how I hold on to then kind of monkey climb down the railing. And all the bouncers thought that I was just trying to throw up over a balcony or something. It's like, no, that's literally just how he needs to climb downstairs.
Yep. And these things are hugely important because to me, and we're running out of time, and I've got a couple of comments on questions that have been answered in the chat, which is awesome. But to me, I don't think that this can change, not different to how we've talked about changing to make people think that having bikes in cities is a better idea. Don't think this can change until society has a better understanding of just disability, and that disability is really a normal part of the human existence. It's not always something that needs to be fixed. And unless we think about inclusion in just everything we do in our daily activities, then it is, we plan it on, hang on, now we need to do the special disabled consultation and then change that thing. And then we have to get those standards out. But, you know, if you're improving access, then you will work with disabled people because they're able to get to work. And then these things just become second nature in the way we do things. Like our workplaces nowadays are largely not homophobic and they're largely not racist, whereas that's not the way it used to be. So the diversity of disability needs to just be seen, and being able to and trusted to have this panel discussion at a conference where we're not transport engineers or planners or transport researchers. That's a really powerful thing, and we're really grateful for your attendance here. I'm going to bring up a photo and then just talk about some of the answers to the questions that have come in. So just in terms of how we operate every day, there's standards and there's amazing guides, and everybody here understands, of course, you shouldn't end up with situations that create, you know, hazards for people. This was from your walk.
Yeah, so I've got a new dog, and I've just started walking him around the streets, and there is no signage, and it's not just that street, it's dozens of streets, and there's trip hazards, and there's, as you can see, cars. I'm squeezing between cars and barriers and plastic tape and stuff on a dog walk where I didn't expect that when I turned the corner. There was no consultation, no Facebook posts, no letterbox drops, no nothing. And that was my walk a couple of days ago.
So some of the answers that have come through from people representing councils and Transport for New South Wales, it's really pleasing to see that census data and other population data is being used to cross-match with people who are involved in consultation. That's amazing. And it's fantastic. And I wonder, from things that we've learned in yesterday's presentations about using more accessible, positive messaging to talk about what's going on and what are the benefits of this new way of planning things and a more inclusive, more bikeable, more walkable cities. If there was more talk about that in the media to say, we've done this consultation, and the actual voices and the images of the older people and the wheelchair users and the people using walking sticks were included in the public messaging, that's really powerful, because that changes the way that everybody working in a role who's involved in the project is thinking about, oh, hang on, no, I have to remember them. If I'm going to do this to the footpath, that's going to be a problem for Betty, who I know lives on my street now because she was involved in the consultation and we shared her views. That's going to be a problem for Adrian and his dog. So can we either make sure he's got the information, or keep the other side of the street free until that's done? But yeah, I'm wondering whether or not it's really important to make sure that the process feels accessible to people with disabilities, these consultation processes. And to me, that means more than making sure that there's a ramp to the building where it's being held, but also so that as the disabled person, you don't feel like when you go there, you're kind of asking for charity. You want to feel like you're absolutely welcomed, because you've got just as much of a right to be getting around in your community as the next person. So
I think it was that Neil raised a great point, or it might have been Adrian the other day, of when they went to a specialist appointment and there was an awning down over the stairs to get out to the car park, but the ramp went out without any cover. So they just had to wait until the rain stopped to not mess with their electric wheelchair to get in the back of the vehicle that they could actually use. But I did just want to jump on Claire. Davey had a question. What are the lower hanging improvements that can help? Is it the missing links in pathways, more disability parking bays, ramp access, or another approach of identifiable, doable infrastructure? The things that would, like, if I've come from my point of view, the biggest win would be, as we move away from city centres, even just improving curb cuts to be able to use footpaths safely and get around. We were mentioning, or I mentioned earlier in chat, that from my house to the main street, because my local train station wasn't accessible, it's about an 800-metre roll, which might be 7 streets to get up there, but none of the corners have curb cuts. So it's not even worth trying to roll up onto the footpath for 30 meters to then have to find another driveway to then get down. You just have to roll up the street, because it's the only thing you can do, going from the correct side of the street, so you have vision as to if you're going to get hit or not, to the other side of the street, say you're on the right side of an intersection and stop sign, so people turning aren't blindsided to collect you because you were just immediately on the wrong side of the road at an intersection. So curb cuts, I think, would be one of the most important things that would get people off the street to at least then only have to cross the road rather than cruise along up it. And I think disability parking bays are really underestimated. That if we have a look, at least, again, I know this is very Newcastle centric, but as accessible car parks start to disappear from the city, from say Arimba up to Singleton and Newcastle's in between, there's over 20 inaccessible train stations. And I know we mentioned within the next 800 days, every piece of public infrastructure needs to be accessible. But for over 20 non-accessible train stations, we can't just rely on public transport to get to and from where we need to go. We need to make sure that we're still increasing the amount of publicly accessible spaces. And even if there is a possible budget to put sensors in to indicate if they're free or not, the sensors are quite cheap, and that could do some great reporting on how often they're being used and if it might be worth putting more in. And again, as Neil and Vicki were saying, the more people who are able to come and go out, like there's budget there to spend on businesses, cafes, but if we can't get there, we can't spend the money.
Right. Now we've just run 3 minutes over time, with apologies for the next session. To wrap up, low touch things, curb cuts, more information about disabled parking, and don't take it away, as we quite rightly do take the other car parks away. They need to go, and make the public messaging around the consultation and around the excellent improvements that are happening much more visible and much more accessible. We'll wrap up now. This will be recorded, and we'd love to continue to have the conversation. We're going to make an effort to actually invite everyone to another roundtable discussion to see whether there's things that we can actually put into action. Thank you, everyone. I think that we're staying in the room, and I'm just going to wait here and get Paul to let us know the logistics.
Yep. So what's going to happen now is it's actually the lunch and poster session, but we will